Hello learners, this week we have been discussing from block 3, that is on education and training of the tribals. So in this session we are going to discuss on educational problems of scheduled tribes. The scheduled tribes are at different levels of socio-economic and educational development. The scheduled tribes consist of diverse groups of people whose lifestyles, customs, practices and languages differ considerably, not only from that of the general population but also from one another. The problems of education of the scheduled tribe children vary from area to area and tribe to tribe. The presence of scheduled tribes who are historically deprived both socially and educationally makes the educational situation quite complex. If you look at the discussion from the colonial period, already we have discussed in our units, there they did not make use of the educational opportunities that colonialism provided. The low educational achievements of the scheduled tribes that we encounter today are totally inconsonant with the fact that this group was recently debarred from traditional knowledge or learning. It is therefore not surprising that in India today the state does not care enough about the literacy of these groups, and these groups themselves have also not developed a powerful drive to force the state to provide better educational services. There are a lot of empirical studies that indicate one of the major reasons contributing to the low literacy level of tribals is the unsuitable scheduling of the school timing, which clashes with the work schedule of the economic activities of tribal families, in which even the potential school-going children participate. Thus, Varia Elvin very appropriately sums up the situation that for a tribal family to send its grown-up girl or boy to school is essentially a matter of economics and entails dislocation in the traditional pattern of division of labor. Many parents cannot just afford to send their children to school. Supporting this position, the National Sample Survey 42nd round claims that the dropout rate among the tribals is mainly for participating in household economic activity and for other economic reasons. There are various difficulties at home that prevent them from devoting enough time for study, or they are forced to help their parents in agricultural and household works, leaving them with little time for studies. So this leads to the poor performance of the tribal children compared to non-tribal children in India. And another crucial problem is the language of instruction in which elementary education is to be provided. The language advantage includes increase of access and equity, improved learning outcomes, reduced dropout rates, socio-cultural benefits and reduction of overall costs. Having to learn a state language that is not their mother tongue creates learning problems. Unlike non-tribal children whose mother tongue is the language of the text, tribal children have to learn all 4 disciplines of listening, speaking, reading and writing in an alien language and culture. This is one reason why tribal children often drop out from schools. The monolingual tribals face cognitive and communicative problems where the institutions are in the major regional language, and this is what T.K. Ullman has described as teaching through an alien language. Virginia Saxa also supports this view by stating that language is one of the most serious handicaps before tribes to get the benefits of the preferential treatment policy as compared to even the scheduled groups such as scheduled castes. The poor response of tribal children to formal education and their higher rate of attrition, especially in the first few years of schooling, relate to the language problem. So, in the name of state language, the notion of one dominant language as the medium of instruction leaves thousands illiterates in their mother tongue and foster low achievement levels in the dominant language itself. Now let us look at the training and capacity building for the tribal population. Training to impart knowledge of laws, constitutional provisions in respect of scheduled areas, tribal rights, including Forest Rights Act 2006, the Parliament enacted Panchayat's extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1996, PESA Prevention of Atrocity Act, Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, etc. The capacity building of functionaries and tribal representatives on socio-economic programs. The capacity building of artisans for art and craft, metal craft, painting, dance, drama, textiles, handicrafts, as well as value addition to art, craft and designs, etc. This can include kits and tools, etc. Then conducting of seminars, conferences and workshops on various tribal related issues, and also think tank related activities. So in order to make a correct appraisal of the problems of tribals in the light of their distinctive life and culture, the Government of India had sponsored a program during third 5-year plan to start Tribal Research and Training Institute in all such states of the country which had more than 1 million tribal population. The institute has in the main 3 sections: research, training and museum. The institute serves the state as a center for studies in tribal situation and problems, planning for tribal areas and evaluating the tribal development program, a documentation center for relevant problems of concerning the tribal region, a coordinating center for anthropological and linguistic studies carried out amongst tribal communities, and also acts as a briefing and training center for officers of ITTP, extension workers, local officers and village level workers, ICDS workers, etc., as well as for workers of voluntary organization. It also acts as a center for collecting and displaying tribal artifacts in a museum setup at this institute, which gives a vivid visual idea of tribal life and culture. Now let us look at the vocational training in tribal areas. It is aimed at upgrading the skills of the tribal youths in various traditional, modern vocations depending upon their educational qualification, present economic trends and the market potential, which would enable them to gain suitable employment or enable them to become self-employed. Under the scheme of vocational training, grants will be available for organizing vocational trainings in recognized institutes or in vocational training centers, subject to terms and conditions revised from time to time of the scheme. Traditionally, tribal communities have undergone drastic changes due to large-scale migration, encroachment by outsiders and increasing vulnerability of the resources on which they have traditionally depended. Though many measures like scheduling of tribal areas, increasing land transfer and recognition of the rights over resources is encouraged by the Government of India, yet tribal are facing problems of land alienation, displacement, indebtedness and bonded labor. Many of the problems are rooted from their increasing attachment with dominant culture and lack of basic competence in education. The then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru advocated for adopting a non-isolation strategy for tribal, but failed to build capacity for tribal to cope with challenges put forth by modern culture. The capacity building initiatives quite clearly must involve a high emphasis on the education sector, that is education for tribals to gain the power and self-reliance and to cope with and transform their material reality. The universalization of primary education in India since 1950 is emphasized but yet remained underperformed. In recent decade, a number of incentives are provided. For example, Sarva Shiksha Mission in 2003, providing elementary education to all children in the age group of 6 to 14 by the year 2010. Midday Meal Scheme 2001, which gives a midday meal scheme to school-going children that dramatically increased the enrollment rate. However, in 9th plan, special provision including pre and post-matric scholarship and hostel facilities are initiated exclusively for the tribals. Now let us look at the Parliamentary Standing Committee's report on educational schemes for tribals submitted on January 3, 2018. This report mainly examined the performance of the existing schemes. The committee noted that despite many educational schemes for tribals in the country, the literacy rate of tribals is far below the national literacy rate. The various reasons are poor economic conditions of scheduled tribes, considerable distance between home and school, especially for secondary education and above, and lack of awareness about the long-term value of formal education. The committee observed that efforts made by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs through ashram schools, pre-matric scholarships and post-matric scholarships for scheduled tribe students have not yielded the desired results in improving their education status. It noted that the schemes being implemented lack conviction and supervision. The committee recommended a more committed approach by the ministry for the implementation of the schemes. The committee also tried to focus on various aspects like the development of bilingual primers. Bilingual primers are meant to contain text in regional and tribal languages to facilitate learning, that is reading and writing in schools in tribal areas. The committee observed the slow development of bilingual primers and recommended that the ministry must pursue the matter with the states. It also observed with regard to the status of hostels. The committee observed that there are 1,470 functional hostels in the country for ST students. Such hostels seek to provide accommodation to ST students who would otherwise have been unable to continue their education due to economic reasons. The committee noted that hostels have poor building structure and substandard quality of food. The committee also noted that since substantial amount of ministry's money has gone into building these hostels and other infrastructure, they must be properly monitored for them to run well. And the committee also observed with regard to the scheme for the establishment of ashram schools. The scheme for the establishment of ashram schools in tribal subplan areas is a centrally sponsored scheme for construction of all girls ashram schools and boys ashram schools in certain extremism affected areas. The states are responsible for the operation and maintenance of these schools. According to the committee, this delegation of maintenance of ashram schools to state governments has resulted in the poor conditions of these schools. The committee recommended putting in place a mechanism to ensure that the schools adhere to the laid down parameters and have regular monitoring by the states. The committee also noted regarding the post-matric scholarship scheme. The post-matric scholarship scheme provides financial assistance to ST students pursuing post-matric courses in recognized institutions. The committee noted that most of the state governments are reluctant to bear their share of liabilities related to the funds of the scheme. So this leads to difficulties for ST students in continuing their education. And regarding the pre-matric scholarship scheme for the tribal students who are studying in classes 9 and 10, the committee noted that from 2014 to 15 to 17 to 18, funds have not been released to certain states under the scheme. The committee also observed that the lack of determination on the part of the ministry has led to such negligence in dispersal of grants. The committee also observed the functioning of the EKLAVYA model residential schools. The EMRs are set up with a capacity of 480 students per school to provide quality middle and high level education to ST students. The establishment of EMRs is demand driven based on the proposals received from states. The funding of such schools is from the state governments. The committee noted that most of the EMRs are not running well, have poor infrastructure and inadequate teaching staff. The committee recommended that the ministry must devise a mechanism that will help uplift the standard of these schools and make them properly functional. The committee also observed with regard to the National Overseas Scholarship Scheme. The National Overseas Scholarship Scheme provides financial assistance to 20 students selected for pursuing higher studies abroad for PhD and postdoctoral studies. The committee observed that over the years, the number of students receiving this scholarship has been declining. It stated that this might be due to the lack of awareness about the scheme among students. In this context, the committee stated that proper guidance and publicity are key for any scheme to be successful. Now, to sum up, this unit began with the general understanding of education and attempted to explore the close relationship between education and tribal societies. It is followed by the positive responsibility of the state institutions towards the educational development of tribal societies by understanding the importance of different welfare schemes and policies. It also discussed the importance of training in tribal life and relationship between education and training. This unit concluded by analyzing different educational problems of the tribal society in India, and also in spite of various public incentives, concessions and welfare measures, educational development among tribal groups is far from satisfaction. And there also exists a gap between tribals and general population remains conspicuous. These groups are still far below the general population in educational accomplishment, but this must be seen against a starting point of almost total exclusion from the educational opportunities until fairly recently. The specific constraints impeding education of different tribal groups have never been addressed by the administrators and policy makers seriously. So, needless to examine that most of the educational programs for tribals have aimed at quantitative expansion, sometimes even at the cost of the qualitative aspect, which in turn has inhibited dissemination and growth of literacy in tribal areas. To put it differently, the general view of the education scene in the country brings out that tribal areas stand at a much lower level in terms of literacy and enrollment of school-going children compared to other areas. So, education was seen as a vital element in the overall strategy of sustainable development. It, however, cannot on its own provide the solution to all problems, nor is it an alternative to other development programs or structural change. So, we should make voracious attempt to overcome all these hurdles. So, in this context, comprehensiveness of education is highly desirable, and it must act as an effective agency of culture and also promote changes in the desired direction. So, learners, hope we would have understood this unit. We have discussed this unit in detail. With this, we have come to an end of this unit. Thank you.